What's up, everybody? It's Dylan here, bringing a brand new video. We're going to be talking about how you can beat PSYFrames and how everything that you can do against PSYFrames. I'm also going to be talking about some very taboo techs, some cards that you probably should not expect against PSYFrames or expect to play against PSYFrames, but are still okay. And I'm also going to talk about cards that absolutely do not work against PSYFrames, or that they're not very good against PSYFrames. So, without any further ado, let's just jump right into it. So, first card we're going to talk about is Mind Drain. Mind Drain is one of the best cards against PSYFrames simply because it stops them from activating cards in their hand. While sure, this is a very good card, it really depends on your opponent not having Overload. So if your opponent does not have Overload, then this card is perfectly good. This card gets in all the value that it can, and it's just generally good. So, but unless they have the Overload, this card's not particularly good. So you have to keep that in consideration when signing Mind Drain into it. My favorite tech, and it's actually a very creative tech, and it's very interesting, is Mind Crush. When PSYFrames activate an effect in the hand, that card stays in the hand until the action of what your opponent is doing is done. So, for example, if they're going for an attack, and they attempt to activate Beta, they have to attempt to activate. So, therefore, you have a response to their activation, and you can Mind Crush that Beta out of their hands, and they won't be able to get that effect. So that's another key thing. Also, it's not very bad. It's not terrible in the late game either, because if you're playing against a PSYFrame player, you call out like a driver, or not a driver, a delta or a gamma, where the effects of where those two card effects alone are particularly good, and you pull them out of the hand, you might pull out one or two cards out of their hand, and that's also very good. Which means you can just go about your turn without the fear of gamma or delta. So. Next card is Vanity Temptedness. This is actually the most reliable, even though it's at 1, it's still the most effective card against PSYFrames. So when it basically is just puts a stop to them even attempting to summon. Again, this is all depending on the fact that they don't have Epsilon or Overload. So, however, this does has its drawbacks. The same thing with Mind Drain, in my opinion. And actually, since they're traps, this card, all three of these have very interesting effects. So, for example, if your opponent attempts to attempt to activate one of these cards, and I activate Epsilon in response, for example, let's say you normal summon a monster, and I attempt to activate Alpha in response to that normal summon, and you flip Vanity's Emptiness, I can then respond with Epsilon and get 4 summons and be able to synchro summon twice. So that is the potential risk that you have to play with cards like these, because I mean, the risk kind of outweighs the reward outweighs the risk. So other cards that you might want to consider, especially if you're Monarchs, if you should probably play Vanity's Fiend or Vanity's Ruler. Either one works. It doesn't matter which one. So again, background removal is very keen against this deck. I mean, even if you hit Overload, it's not the end of the world, because the worst case scenario is that they get a Search, because Overload is probably the best trap in their arsenal, simply because it banishes everything on the field. So if this card is as activated, or if you're managed to pop even Circuit and Overload, all they get is just the Search. All they do is just replenish the Circuit. They don't get to activate Overload. Sure, they can respond to it, but it really doesn't matter, because they're losing a card regardless. Then they're going to neg 1 themselves, and they're going to attempt to banish something that doesn't really matter on your side of the field. Same thing for MSD. This is particularly good if Circuit's on the board. So, I mean, generally speaking, if you want to stop their Circuit, you should probably stop their Circuit. So, if you can stop Circuit, you should probably stop Circuit. Discord. This is a random tech that I thought would work, but I actually didn't remember what this card did, and it actually does work. Either player can synchro summon. Simple as that. I mean, it's probably the worst tech in the world, but it's definitely an interesting tech that to say the least. Cards like Mistaken Arrest and Mistake themselves are really good cards, because with Alpha and with a lot of cards with about 3, 6, 9 cards in the deck, searching for other cards, it would hurt a lot. Again, this is dependent on Delta and Epsilon as well, and you also have to keep in consideration that Mistake is a continuous drop, so they can just overload it away. So you might want to keep that in mind. The 2 cards that I see people citing most often against PSYFrames and that they do not actually work is Lightning Prison Mirror and Imperial Iron Wall. Imperial Iron Wall simply means that, well, since I can't remove my cards from the game, they just stay on the board. So therefore, if you don't kill them, and since their conditions can't go off, they can't banish themselves. So I mean, realistically, I have a synchro summon fodder. Even if it's just Driver, if you just leave Driver on the board, that's a level 6 2500 attack monster that you're leaving on the board. And if I have Circuit, you're not going to kill it. You're not going to kill that Driver. So I mean, this card is the most commonly attacked card against PSYFrames, but in my opinion, it doesn't necessarily work. Lightning Prison Mirror, again, it doesn't necessarily work because you have to stop Circuit, and Circuit doesn't really matter. Circuit matters. Circuit's the card that matters the most. So that's it on that. However, another reason why this card is not very good against PSYFrames is because even though it stops their effects from doing anything on the field, because their effects do activate when resolved on the field, their stop effects activate in the field. So Alpha searches, it won't be able to search under Lightning Prison Mirror. It doesn't matter because if they get the summons, that's all they really are looking for. They're not really looking forward to negating your stuff. That's just necessarily a bonus. But yeah, other cards that you could probably consider is Thunder King Ryo. Thunder King Ryo is also a very good card against this deck, simply because it also hurts Wind-Up Rabbits, because you could just punch over them. They're forced to banish them, and you could just sock them to death with that. Another good card to actually side against that actually didn't occur to me is Necroface, because if they have cards in Banish, they can just Psychic Field Zone or Psychic Path them back into their hand. But if you eliminate that process, then I guess it doesn't matter. So anyway, guys, tell me what you guys think about this about this discussion on how to beat PSYFrames. And this has been Silas, and I'm signing out.